So we kick off this course first talking about customers. And the first thing we want to understand is, what is it that customers value? And how do I go about finding areas where customers might value something? And so what value is how much worth does a person put on something? And so if I'm going to promote something to a customer, I have to know how much is it's worth to them. And so typically when you see products that don't work well, the first question to ask is, what's the value proposition? I mean, how much value are you actually offering someone, and can I make money at it? So these are the topics in the class that we're going to go over today. And there's one basic concept in all of this: what people value, and this is what I mean about cutting the fat and about conceptual thinking. You're never going to memorize 20 things, but one thing you can remember is that people essentially value 3 things. They value economics, how much it costs. We value esteem, or emotion, how things make us feel. And we value utility. Does it make my life easier? And each of these trade off against each other. Now, in trying to figure out what a value proposition is we first need to know what the background is, because the background or the landscape tells us what something is worth. And so this landscape is defined by what's called the 5 C's. And what we're going to be focusing on is talking about customer need and also context. And to give you an example of context, you wouldn't pay $50 for a bottle of water. I mean, it's ridiculous, because you go somewhere else and get a bottle of water much more cheaply. On the other hand, if you're in the middle of the desert and there's no other water around and you're out of water, you would gladly pay that $50. Well, that's context. The background and situation you're going into are different. And so the value proposition is basically the reason why are they going to purchase your product. It's not always inherently obvious, because values can get confused, because what do they value more, economics or utility? Depends on the product. But this is one of the biggest driving factors in why startups fail. They just have bad value propositions. And so in terms of the concepts that drive values, it's what do I value? How do I measure it? And the way I measure it is looking at, am I creating gain in someone's life? Or am I doing loss reduction, which is getting rid of the bad stuff? And how relevant is it to me? And what do we do to measure it? And so in terms of value drivers, I've talked about functional, psychological, and economic. And how large these things are matters. And so to figure out the magnitude, okay, so how do I measure emotion, for example? Well, I look at 3 things. Or how do I measure utility? Does it bring gain in my life? Meaning, is there some kind of benefit that gives me something more of something? Or do I reduce loss? Meaning, I take away the bad stuff. It's actually pretty funny. I was talking with these engineers from Canada, and they said, in the United States, he said, you tend to be driven by gain or greed. Pushing forward and breaking frontiers. He said, we in Canada, we're more interested in reducing loss. We're more interested in taking away the bad stuff. And don't underestimate reducing loss, because what we're going to see in a future lecture, we value pain 3 times more than gain. So, same order of magnitude, reducing loss is going to be worth 3 times more to us. And then finally, efficacy. Does this align to actually what I want? And what this gets into is that as a customer, if I look at gain, pain, and relevance is like my job duties. What is it that I have to do? And so each of those parameters measures utility, emotion, or economics. So as a marketer, what I need to do is come up with solutions that fit each of these, or at least one of them, whether I'm creating gain in your life or relieving pain. And what it comes down to is, how good a fit is it? And this gets into relevance. How does 3 of these match up? Here's an example of looking at, now, how do I find these parameters, whatever? Here's one example, which is called the buyer utility matrix, and this is just a generic way of looking at. These are the parameters that we value. Like, for example, reducing risk in my life is a way of reducing the negative stuff. Convenience of utility, that takes away negative stuff in my life. And so there are basically 6 different steps when you buy something. And so this is one way of looking at it. In terms of the things that we value, what does the product do? Is it a fair price? Can I access it easily? Is there service? Certain products, for example, if I buy a car, if you spend a lot of money, you want good customer service. You want customer support. If that product doesn't work. On the other hand, if you buy something for $1, you don't expect there to be any support or service. And also the experience, which gets into emotion. This is why entrepreneurs are always talking about pain. And the reason why is it's much easier to sell a need than a want. So what I need to do is first figure out, is there a large enough value here for somebody to really care about my product? And then the next step is, can I make money? And so now we get to the point where we're talking about the nature of things. And that's it. Okay, now that I understand pain and gain, how do I go about finding them? And one thing to do is figure out who your customer is and look at their activities. What is the nature of what they do? And I'll talk about that in the next video.